What is going on, everybody? Today I'm making a video that I was hoping was going to be made a completely different way. A gentleman reached out to me a few weeks ago. He saw that I was looking for a pre-owned Prevost that would be a little bit less expensive, and called me and let me know about a Prevost that he had bought new in 1987, and told me about how great of a coach it was, how he was the only one that maintained it. He bought it new in 1987, and he was really worried about this coach going to the right home and wasn't concerned about price as much. So I told him, listen, it's a lot of money for me to travel all of the way to Pennsylvania to take a look at this bus, but he was very confident that it was a clean deal. And I'm rolling around in this tour bus and was already out on the East Coast. So I was like, well, what's another 400 or 500 miles? I was in Indiana already, 400 or 500 miles, round trip times 2, 1,000 miles, 5 miles to the gallon. Was not a cheap proposition at all to travel to Pennsylvania. But I thought, you know what, let's go out there and check it out. So the gentleman was very adamant that he wanted this bus to go to the right home, and he had watched my YouTube channel. And I'm like, hey man, if you make me the right deal, I'd love to do that. Now, I've talked about it in previous videos, how important it is to inspect a coach. You can have two coaches the same year, same amount of miles, and they can be completely different. The analogy I like to use is there could be two brand new minivans sold today. One minivan may be used for maybe like a traveling salesperson that talks on their Bluetooth, goes highway miles all day, every day, maybe has a cup of coffee in the cup holder. And then there could be a minivan sold today that is just going to be totally just children, dogs. It's going to have all kinds of people trampling through it. It's not going to get maintained. It's not going to be in a corporate account where they're very religious about maintenance. So both of these vehicles can travel the same amount of miles, but the values of these two vehicles can be completely different. So it's so important when buying an RV to go lay eyes on it, touch it, feel it, inspect it. I've actually helped a couple of my clients purchase some motorhomes. If you're looking at a multi-million-dollar motorhome and your time is very valuable, I am for hire, RVingwithandrewsteele.com. You can consult a phone call. It's $100 an hour to jump on a call. And then from there, I can get you on a retainer and do some traveling to go try to help you find the best bus. But this was one that I was actually looking at for myself. It was going to be, in a price range that I could probably pull off, and I thought it'd be a really fun story. The gentleman also told me about some other interesting stuff that he had going on that would be cool for me to make some YouTube content out of. I thought, well, worst case scenario, I'm gonna go out there. If the bus isn't as good as the gentleman's saying, at least I can maybe film some other stuff. Well, I got out there, ladies and gentlemen, and unfortunately with this internet, I think there's a lot of people out there just looking for a friend. And I got out there, and this gentleman started, telling me his stories, and he had some interesting stories, but at the end of the day, I'm young. I'm not retired like this gentleman was, and I've got to make a living. My Sadie lady, we got to put dog food in her bowl. So I got out there to this gentleman's house, and immediately I saw several cars in the driveway. I would probably say this gentleman was probably a hoarder. There was probably 20 cars on the property. And that was kind of the first red flag. And the gentleman was like 87 or 88 years old. So maybe he was trying to find a good home for some of this stuff. So he showed me some of his stuff, and it was a pretty lengthy process, but I wanted to hear him out, and I wanted to, give him respect and hear his stories and understand where he was coming from and try to learn as much as possible. Well, when I saw the bus and I found out, and he had said it was all maintained, he had basically represented it that this bus was a total cream puff. And I asked him how much he wanted for it. He said $75,000, which was, for a total cream puff, that may be, fair for a 1987. That's not, not a bad deal. It's an 8V92 still, so definitely has its pluses and its minuses. But I thought, hey, if I can get in a Prevost for real cheap, if it really was a legit cream puff for 75 grand, that wouldn't be terrible. Well, I walked into the bus and the bus had not moved in 10 years. And now I was feeling pretty bad about myself, but today I actually got a phone call from a couple of my buddies over at Premier RV Service. So Louis, you guys flew all the way out to St. Louis to buy this coach, and then what happened when you got there?
Basically, it was misrepresented by the owner. You know, when you ask all the questions before you make this trip, and you get there, and their idea of mint is a lot different than ours. But yeah, it had some fault codes coming up on the engine, just like a lift pump failure, and a couple low coolant faults, which typically leads us to think that the radiator might be aluminum, which it was, and we had to put 3 gallons of coolant in there. So we were kind of thinking that's 2,200 miles back to Oregon, and the coach isn't what we thought it was going to be. So we just decided to pass on it and fly home.
And how many coaches do you have in inventory right now? You guys are pretty hungry for inventory, so it would have been real easy to try to jam something in there, huh?
It's funny you say that, Andrew. We were just talking about that. Sometimes you just got to walk away and not buy something, even though that we're at record lows of inventory. But you know, the risk reward wasn't there in the sense of what could be wrong. So driving 2,200 miles and finding other issues and breaking down, we just decided to pass on it.
Well, that makes me feel a lot better. I'm glad I'm not the only one that traveled across country to inspect the condition, and that's why it's so important to inspect condition of a coach.
You definitely made the right decision. I mean, when a coach sits for a long period of time, you know, you can build up a lot of things in the fuel systems as algae and other things like that. When we arrived at this coach, that was the first thought I thought. I mean, the thing had less than a quarter of a tank, and it hasn't really moved in the last year. So just think of all that time, of all that fuel and everything, all the moisture that you're going to be getting in these tanks. So,
oh yeah, you would have ran it for 30 miles down the road and then had all kinds of problems. I just heard about a guy in New Jersey that had that same thing happen. So,
well, we've had it happen to us. The one from Florida.
Wow. And how expensive can that get if there's algae in the fuel tank and you don't know it until you're driving down the road?
So yeah, that just happened on a coach, and they had to pull the whole tank on it. He ended up spending like $22,000.
Wow.
It affected the lift pump, and then injectors were all clogged up, so they had to do all that, and then it was just one thing after another. So, yeah, coaches that sit, you know, everyone wants a low mileage coach, and you hear that from everyone. Oh, I don't want anything that has more than 50,000 miles. I tell you what, I'd rather have a coach that someone's used it and maintained it and did a lot of these preventative maintenances.
Yeah, I'm actually rolling around in a tour bus that has almost 1 million miles on it. Everybody thinks it's brand new. And we just went to New Jersey, and they just went to St. Louis, Missouri to buy a coach, and they ended up getting on an airplane flight back to Oregon. So this isn't the first time I've heard. I've actually heard a lot of stories about, you know, buyers traveling across country, inspecting a coach. It's nothing like the seller represented over the phone. And then you spend money on an airplane ticket, so you waste your time on rental cars, hotel rooms, your time, airplane tickets, all of that stuff. So I'm not the only one. So I finally got to see this bus, and honestly, I didn't even take a single picture of it or video of it. I was just so disappointed at that point. I just wanted to get back to the bus, and it just was not a good situation. So the bus had not moved in 10 years, and I tell people, whether these buses move or not, they need to be maintained every year. Those tires have, you know, date codes on them that are getting older. Every piece of rubber, every piece of fluid. And what I've found is you'd much rather have a coach that's been used than a coach that's sat. Because if a coach is being used, good chances are the owner's gonna get things repaired and they're gonna have to maintain it. And it's just much better. I wouldn't be afraid of miles on a coach. I'd rather have a higher mile coach that's been maintained than end up with a situation like this. I walked into the bus and it was clapped out. So I'm like thinking maybe, you know, and the guy said it's not about price. So, you know, maybe if this coach just needs a lot of maintenance and whatnot, it's still a possibility. But I was going to need him to come down like significantly on price. And I got into the bathroom, I opened the bathroom door, and there was a toilet paper roll that had been completely eaten by rodents, so it was scattered all over the floor. You could see all the toilet paper. Like, he hadn't even gone in there to even clean up the toilet paper. And I told him, buddy, you've got rodents in here. And his response was, well, the rodents ate the toilet paper, they didn't eat the wires. I will tell you, the worst possible thing that can happen to a bus is rodents getting into it. I remember talking to a dealership that I asked him, what's the worst bus you've ever had? He said, a bus that rodents got into it, ate the wiring. I'd rather have a bus with a fire than a bus with rodent damage. A fire, you can at least track the damage. You just track the fire, cut it all out, rebuild it. Rodents, they're just all over the bus, all over this thing. They could be just, you don't know where they're eating. So you're basically chasing a tornado, a losing proposition at that point. Trying to chase rodent damage in a bus that has a whole value of $75,000, it's a losing proposition. I told that gentleman, unfortunately, with rodent damage, this bus is it's a parts bus at that point. It hasn't been maintained. Rodents have eaten it up. It is not worth restoring that shell, especially for what he wanted out of it, because you're going to have to just basically rebuild it. I mean, you'd be better off to almost just, you know, just a lot cheaper ways to do it than to strip out this bus that's been damaged. I just thought I'd take a moment today to share with you guys the downside of trying to travel around the country and look at these buses, and that's why it's so important to touch and feel these coaches. And if that guy had any common sense, he could have cleaned up that toilet paper and I wouldn't have seen that. That's why it's so important to have a technician go and check every one of these systems. You want them to turn on the systems, let you know if they're functioning or not. I would definitely not buy a used RV without getting it inspected. Inspecting it yourself, the more time you spend with the bus, the more you're gonna learn, the more you can get the owner of the coach to talk, the more you're gonna learn as well. So that's another thing, just keep them talking, they'll tell you the truth. There's a lot of truth. There's definitely a lot of people that hide the truth out there, but there's a lot of people, if you get them talking enough, they'll let you know exactly what's going on with that coach. So I wish that I was making a video about I just bought a Prevost in Pennsylvania and got a great deal on it. I mean, the gentleman baited me. I knew I was getting baited when he says, I just want the coach to find the right home. I'm not worried about price. I wish that was the case. And unfortunately, the right home for that bus is a junkyard. So appreciate all of you liking these videos and subscribing to the channel. I hope you're all having a better day than I am today, but could be a lot worse. I have a lot to be thankful for, but it can get really expensive trying to buy these buses. So make sure you do your homework and ask as many questions before you jump on that airplane. So greatly appreciate all of you, and I hope you're all having a great day. Thanks again.